Now let's have a look at the morning papers. And Stuart Hughes from BBC World News joins us again, as does Leila Gouran, who's Director of Global Academy at Cardiff Metropolitan University. And I think I'll let Leila go first. Good morning to you, Leila. What have you got for us?
Good morning, Vaughan. Thanks. Well, the Mail on Sunday says the chef, Jamie Oliver, and the fitness guru, Joe Wicks, have joined forces to declare what the headline calls is a war on toxic US foods. So they're among signatories of a letter urging the government to block the substandard food imports into the UK after Brexit. And writing in the paper, the former Environment Secretary, Theresa Villiers, makes the case for beefing up the powers of the government's new Trade and Agriculture Commission to enforce high food standards. And following on from that, on the Brexit front, the Sunday Times detects some hope of a deal in the talks themselves, reporting that the two sides are preparing to enter the final stages this week, with both giving ground to avoid a no deal.
We shall see. The Brexit saga never ends. Stuart, what have you seen?
The papers are rather uncomfortable reading this morning, Vaughan and Leila, for the Prime Minister, because they dissect the troubles mounting up for Boris Johnson, even though he's got that 80-seat majority. Johnson faces revolt on COVID diktats as poll figures slump, is the splash in The Observer, which reports on what it calls an extraordinary cross-party backlash taking shape over the way he's imposing COVID-19 restrictions without first talking to MPs and consulting them about it.
And I think that's the first poll we've had since the general election that has a clear Labour lead, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely. The Observer front page setting the scene for what's likely to be one of the dominant political battles for the week ahead. On Wednesday, ministers are going to seek a 6-month extension to the special powers that they have to allow them to act unilaterally. And as you say, beyond the Westminster bubble, the Observer pointing to signs that voters too are questioning Boris Johnson's leadership. It's carried out opinion poll showing that Keir Starmer and Labour have taken over the Tories for the first time since April. Sunday Mirror certainly questioning Boris Johnson's leadership. We need a leader, not a buffoon, it says in its leader column. Goes on, the nation needs a more Churchillian figure than the buffoon who now occupies Winston's old number 10 home. Even once loyal Brexiteer Tory MPs are now wondering whether they and we would be better off with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak. And continuing with that theme, I can highly recommend Tim Shipman's piece in the Sunday Times. As always, Tim Shipman has a great piece explaining these emerging battle lines at Westminster, saying that Boris Johnson is torn between saving lives and rescuing the economy, and something's got to give.
Indeed, watch this space. And your second story is a political story as well, Leila.
Yeah, well, it kind of relates. So in Wales Online, they interviewed Mark Drakeford on the Welsh response to the coronavirus pandemic and what comes next. So the First Minister there outlined the best and worst case scenarios for Christmas and said he was focused on exploring the options for single person households in lockdown areas who might be struggling with the lockdown rules. And within that interview, he reveals that if there's no autumn budget, the Welsh Government has no budget after the end of March next year. But he did voice support for Rishi Sunak's job support scheme that he announced last week. But elsewhere, Annalise Dodds in The Observer says that, you know, it harks back to the worst of Thatcher and that the measures announced this week failed to save low-paid jobs and make it cheaper for employers to lay off one person rather than to bring back two part-time.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, that, isn't it? That because it seems that Rishi Sunak had a hit on the day, but as days have gone by, the questions are being asked more and more about that plan.
Yes, definitely.
Stuart, what else have you seen?
Well, if you're one of the many people working from home and you're tempted to take it a little bit easy because the boss isn't tracking your every move from behind his or her walnut desk in the corner office, then The Observer has a warning for you, because it says more and more employers are postponing and cancelling plans for a return to the office, as we know. And as a result, some managers are deploying increasing levels of surveillance in an attempt to recreate the feeling of being in an office when you're working at home. And the surveillance surveillance, according to The Observer, can take different forms. Failure to open collaboration apps such as Slack and Microsoft Teams, which indicate when you come online that you're at your desk at home, can be taken by managers to be the same as being late for work. Presumably the threat there is that could potentially involve disciplinary action if it happens too often. And some companies have started demanding that staff join video conferences every morning, crucially with the webcam on. No lying in your pit with your bed head during the morning meeting permitted there. You've got to be bright and breezy and with the webcam on. What I think is interesting about this story is that it highlights the way that the lines between our professional and personal lives are becoming blurred after 6 months during which millions of us have been working from home. Yes, I'm expected to be productive between 9 and 5, but my home is still my home. It's my personal space, and maybe I don't want the boss to see my family photos or inspect the contents of my bookshelf through my webcam on that morning Zoom meeting. And a researcher from Edinburgh University has an interesting insight saying that attempts to keep a closer eye on employees could have the opposite effect of what's intended. She says there's not really any evidence that workers are more productive when they're monitored, but what we do know is the sense of being in a panopticon can actually depress you and make you less productive. So maybe one of the examples of the law of unintended consequences there.
Yeah. Leila, what else have you seen?
Yeah, I can attest to the merging of the boundaries. I'm working from home at my kitchen table at the moment as we speak. I've got a story, the Honours Joy for NHS Heroes. It's on the front of the Sunday Express, which reports hundreds of doctors, nurses, fundraisers and volunteers will be recognised in the delayed Queen's Birthday Honours next month. And the Sunday People has the front headline, the scandal of the 500,000 long COVID victims. So these are people with crippling long-term symptoms of the virus. And the paper says these may be the latest victims of what they call government bungling. It speaks to a 28-year-old nurse, Sophie Evans, who complains that specialist clinics promised by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, have yet to materialise, and she doesn't know how she's not dead. The government says an upcoming COVID-19 online rehab service will ensure that everyone gets the care that they need.
I was reading about one of these long COVID cases yesterday, and the terrible thing about it is they talk about waiting to see experts and specialists and so on, but basically the specialists don't know anything. All they can say is rest and hope. You know, that's the problem with this disease, is we don't know enough about it as yet. Yes,
certainly, and I think it's enlightening to read about somebody, a survivor, but who still lives with symptoms, because we just get the death figures, don't we? The infection rates and the death rates. We don't really get a lot more of the contextual information.
And the pressure that will put on the health service possibly over decades. Stuart, what else have you got?
Well, during the early stages of lockdown, my neighbourhood WhatsApp group was abuzz on a regular basis with messages asking whether someone could spare a bag of flour or a cup of baking powder. The country, do you remember, went nuts baking banana bread and sourdough. And the Sunday Times warns that it could all be about to happen again. The driver for the next wave of flour panic buying, no surprise, once again, Great British Bake Off, moves towards a second lockdown that we're heading towards at the moment, already in place in some parts of Wales and the rest of the UK, have coincided with a new series of Great British Bake Off with 9 million people watching the first episode last Tuesday. That's what's fueling demand for baking supplies once again. But fear not, this time the Sunday Times says the major supermarkets are on it. It says Waitrose and M&S have stockpiled extra flour and yeast in warehouses, and flour mills have been running for 24 hours a day since late March, so supplies aren't under threat this time. So if you are worried about being able to complete your signature bake in the weeks ahead, then it seems you can rest easy.
I don't know if you watched it, Stuart, but I thought Bake Off jumped the shark with those portrait head cakes. I think hilarious, but a cake too far, if one can say that.
I did enjoy the Freddie Mercury cake, which was on Extra Slice. That was, if you haven't seen that, that's a thing of beauty and well worth checking out.
But the Attenborough cake was definitely scary. Stuart, Leila, thank you both very much indeed. Now, if you want to, you can listen again to this programme on BBC Sounds, the app for music, radio and podcasts. You can catch up with our subjects and guests by following @Wales Politics on Twitter. And there's more politics in Politics Wales with James Williams on BBC One at 10 o'clock today. He'll have Elfyn Llwyd and Mark Drakeford, the First Minister, with him. This has been Sunday Supplement. Coming up after the news is All Things Considered. Bore da i chi.